Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today. This has been a fascinating panel. And as Rob said, I'm going to talk in 15 minutes about sort of the technological milieu of today's young adults. Just a quick, the 12-minute presentation version is that the Pew Research Center, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a public opinion kind of facts-only, non-advocacy, non-policy research center, part of the Pew Charitable Trust's universe. So what I want to talk about today is a couple of themes, and then we'll talk about data that kind of fits underneath each of these themes. But first, I want to talk about the enormous changes that we've seen over the past roughly decade. I'm actually going to show data for 12 years. But the ways in which this group of young adults has really come of age in a time of really radical technological change, particularly when it comes to access to information and when it comes to access to people. And particularly this technological change, as we'll talk through, has really radically altered expectations for access to information, as well as expectations for access to people and the ways in which social lives get organized. And also the ways in which you present yourself and are expected to present yourself to kind of the world at large. So as this first bullet point says, we've really moved over the past 12 years from this very slow sort of stationary connectivity where we access the internet with wires on desktops. We were chained to a desk, there was a chair, nobody had broadband, you weren't using video. About half of the people had a cell phone. This is general adult data, by the way. Less than half of Americans used the internet. There was no such thing as social networking sites. They didn't come along for another half a decade. And information flowed to you. You got information from other people. It wasn't a kind of an exchange of information. You weren't creating information, and you weren't in a position to kind of have your voice be heard. So fast forward to 2012, and we have 82% of adults using the internet, and in fact, about half of older adults, as pictured here, are also using the internet. Young adults, of course, are far and away using the internet. Almost all young adults, it's about 5% who don't use the internet in some way, but almost all of them are using the internet. Now we have broadband at home, which gives us access to things like great video content. We have cell phones. About half of adults have smartphones, which is suddenly like putting a computer in your pocket. In fact, a computer that was probably more powerful than the computer you were using in 2000 is now something that you carry around with you and use to make phone calls and do a variety of other things. We now have tablet computers. We have a diversity of platforms that we're using, e-readers, and many of them actually have connectivity to the internet. And we have wireless connectivity. The fact that we are now untethered from that desk and can connect to information and people wherever we go is a huge innovation. And then, as you can see, 65% of online adults use social networking sites. Obviously, young adults use a lot more of that. I'm going to show some of that data in a second. But that's, again, a new, I hesitate to call it a third place in that term that we sometimes use to talk about cafes and other places that aren't home and that aren't work for people to get together. But truly, we now have a place that for many young adults is, in fact, a seamless part of how they expect to interact with people in their lives. So mobile connectivity. So we're going to talk a little bit about mobile access in a second. As I said, it changes your access to information and your expectations of access. So suddenly, it's not just that you can reach your mom, it's that you can reach your mother all the time, and that you now call her, if you're a young adult or an adolescent, you now may perhaps even call her 2 or 3 times a day. In fact, you can call your friend from the dressing room, take a picture of the pants you're thinking about buying, and get her feedback immediately. And so the ways in which we expect to have other people involved in some ways in the minutia of our lives has really changed. And so I'm sorry this is so small, but look for the red arrows. That's going to point us to 18 to 29-year-olds, and that's the data cut I'm going to present today. As you can see, 93% have a cell phone, 65% have a smartphone. So And you can see just by looking at the numbers below them, about the same number of 30 to 49-year-olds have both smartphones and cell phones. But young adults are still, in many cases, the most enthusiastic users of these devices. And of course, people want to see these other data points. I'm not going to go into it right now around differentials and use around race and ethnicity and income. There's some really fascinating ones. Suffice it to say, young minority youth are much more likely to be using these tools actually than white youth, particularly text messaging, which we'll see in a second, and particularly accessing the internet. So here's text messaging. 97% of cell phone owners who are 18 to 29, which is, as we've seen, most of them to send text messages. You can see at the bottom, they, on average, 18 to 24-year-olds send 110 text messages a day, in comparison to 41 by your average median adult. It's a lot of text messaging. That's, in many ways, a vital part of how young adults communicate today. It's truly an important, if you ask a young adult, for the most part, there are certainly some who still enjoy phone calls, and let's not get away from the fact that most young adults, if they had the choice, would spend time in person with the people they care about. But absent that opportunity, text messaging is probably the way you're going to reach most young adults in your life. This is what we call cell mostly users. These are folks who actually access the internet most of the time from their mobile phone. So that actually has a lot of implications for when you're trying to get access to information to folks in this group, that remembering they're going to be reading on a screen the size of the palm of your hand. They're not on a giant, beautiful screen like that. They are looking and accessing that information on the go. But that's the other part of it. So it's this tiny screen. They're accessing it wherever they are. It's often now hooked into GPS. So the information that they're accessing is actually connected to exactly where they are at the moment. So they can find the closest McDonald's. They can find the nearest ATM. They can find the nearest health clinic to get information about the condom that broke last night. So there's all sorts of ways in which having the internet in your pocket and having mobile access to information is really radically changing how these teens and how these young adults go about getting access to information in their lives. And as you can see, this is how they're accessing the internet. And they're also really, in some ways, curating, managing their lives on the go. They are recording and documenting their lives with these tools in their pocket. They are taking photos, they're recording videos, they're doing email. They're also doing things that are as mundane as banking on their phones. So really thinking about the phone as the sort of Swiss Army knife of life in the pockets of young adults is a kind of a critical concept. And they're likely to do all of these things, and basically every single thing that you could think about on a mobile phone, they're more likely to do it than pretty much every other category of adult. So we've talked about mobile. Now we're going to talk about social, and then we're going to actually put it together. But first, social media is actually an incredibly important part of young adults' lives. As you can see, 83% of 18 to 29-year-olds use a social networking site. That's in comparison to 67% of all adults. So there is roughly a little less than 20% of young adults who aren't using social networking sites. So let's keep them in mind. Young adults, youth are not a monolith, as I think we've talked about throughout this morning's set of discussions. But social media is really quite important. And you can see that young adults are actually using all different kinds of social media. Now in my work, I tend to focus on teens. I can tell you, for instance, that we're seeing some really interesting movements in a piece of research that we're going to release in about 2 weeks around diversification of social media platforms. And I think we see that also here amongst young adults. Facebook is the dominant platform for young adults and for pretty much anyone. But we're really starting to see some very enthusiastic use of Twitter, in particular 18 to 29-year-olds. It's more like 30% of them who are using Twitter. So those numbers in the middle are reflective of all adults. But you can see, in fact, 18 to 29-year-olds are the most enthusiastic users of all of these sites. You can see that Pinterest is the exception, and that's only because women in their 30s love it too. And they're kind of changing the dynamics. All the women in the office audience laughed, and other people are like, what is Pinterest? Actually, if you ask adolescents about Pinterest, they're like, oh, I think that's that thing my mom uses. Seriously, they have no idea. And so people know, actually, hands up, people who know what Pinterest is. Okay, so for those who don't, Pinterest is like pin interest. It's a mashup of those two words. It's an opportunity to collect content from around the web and post it on boards that can then be shared with others. It's very visual. Instagram is a photo site that allows you to modify your photos and share them with others. Tumblr is also a very photo-oriented, it's actually a blogging site technically, but it's really about photos and graphics that are shared. And so this is really the landscape of social media use. But what I think what's really important here is that this is now the site where teens and young adults are presenting themselves to the world, right? This is where they're working through some of this identity work that we talked about earlier, which maybe is more problematic now that you can push off your identity work to later in your life. Nevertheless, this is where you're expected to present yourself to the world. And that is an incredibly curated thing amongst adolescents and young adults. Whether you're a gang member who has to carefully curate how you display images of yourself on your Facebook profile to be sure both not to offend people, but to portray a particular persona to the world, or if you're a college-bound, middle-class suburban kid who needs to show the prospective college admissions officers that I am worthy of admission to your institution, or I'm a 14-year-old who wants to portray a particular persona to my giant network of friends, which includes people like the lady at my church, my parents, as well as all the people in my gym class. And it's a very complicated place. It's a very complicated set of negotiations that young adults are having to go through in terms of how to present themselves in those spaces, how to navigate the different audiences that are in each of these spaces. And so when we see actually this diversification of platforms where we see people starting to use Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr, part of that, and they tell us in some qualitative work that we've done, is that the complexities of Facebook and the management of all of those different people in those sites is really difficult. And so they're now moving to places and spending time in places where it's a little bit less complicated. Twitter, I just have to do 140 characters. It's open. I don't have to worry about whether it's private or public. I know it's out there. It's where some of my friends are, but not all of my friends. It's just easier. Others who say, I just like to post the photos. It's friendlier. People are nicer to me in those spaces. So there's a lot of reasons why teens and young adults are really starting to change how they're spending time. But I think the real takeaway here is that this is an incredibly important place in the lives of young adults. This is where, and it's seamless. There is no difference between something that somebody posted on Facebook and something that somebody like shouted in a room. It's a part of your social life that where young adults do not differentiate between something that happens on Facebook and something that happens in person. It's all a part and parcel of where you interact socially with people in your life. So let's put these two things together. Now we've talked about mobile and we've talked about social, and there's now this new set when you add in the overlay of geolocation. So you're on the go, and now you have GPS enabled on your phone, and then you have these social sites that allow you to suddenly create your social life on the go. That can be anything from being able to have your phone to find out where parties are because you can check in on Facebook and see where your friends are. Or it could be that you use something like Foursquare. We actually don't see a lot of use of Foursquare right now. This is about 5% of adult cell owners check in with their location. We don't see an enormous difference with young adults. But nevertheless, this allows you to say, hey, I'm at the coffee shop down the road. Other people come and hang out with me and we'll have a cup of coffee. I'm at a party in somebody's dorm room. I'm at a party at somebody's house. And you'll be able to see where the parties are. So it's this kind of on-the-fly reorganization of kind of social experiences. And the opportunity to serendipitously encounter social experiences with people you already know, or serendipitously encounter social experiences with people you've never met before. So how many people are here familiar with Grindr? Okay, so this is actually a really interesting app. It's aimed at gay men and used exclusively by them, and it's a geo social app that allows you to find out all and see pictures of gay men interested in meeting you for a variety of purposes who are in the area right around you at that particular moment. So it allows for kind of just-in-time creation of romantic or other social experiences, friendship, what have you. They have attempted to move this through something called Blender into the heterosexual space with less success. Grindr is actually very, very popular amongst young gay men in particular. But this is a new, and this has a lot of public health implications, obviously. So in terms of engaging with people, how do you give notifications around STD transmission? If somebody does Grindr have a history that you can go through and be like, oh yeah, okay, we got to notify these guys. So there's a whole new way in which there's opportunities for meeting people that really sort of bypass some of the even most kind of traditional or not even traditional new ways of going through family, friends, going through like a common particular space or activity. So it's quite a new overlay around social lives here as well. And then finally, the ways in which this new technology gives teens a wonderful opportunity to have their voices be heard. We talked about how young adults, how things were one way in 2000. And in 2012, things are two way. You can add content. So this is a Snapchat that the owner of the Snapchat captured and then posted on Flickr. So Snapchat, for those who don't know, is an ephemeral messaging app. It allows you to take a picture of something. It can be yourself, it could be you naked, it could be this funny thing that you saw at the grocery store, and then you send it to one other person, and that it then you can set that it disappears, either 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I think 10 seconds is the maximum. Now, sometimes these images can be captured, but teens are using these to share information that they don't want to have to add into the sort of corpus of curated experience that they have on Facebook. So you can send the silly picture of your thumb. Obviously, I love the neon, and you don't have to worry it's going to end up on your Facebook page. It can just be something you send to a friend because it's funny. But so there's this opportunity to share information widely, to post information, but there's also the opportunity to have your missteps and your mistakes publicly available for a lot more people, that persists for a heck of a lot longer. It can be digitally captured and archived. And so there's a real difficulty for young adults in that they don't have the opportunity to get away from some of the things that they do in their past. We as adults have expectations of them that they're in some ways going to regulate themselves like adults. And we have heard through all these wonderful talks this morning that that's not really the case. But now what we have is we're capturing a lot of the digital evidence of some of this poor regulation, bad decision making, sort of this growth moments, which are really important and not something we're judging young adults through the lens of adults. And even when they are adults, a lot of this evidence of their young adult experiences is going to be visible for a lot more people. And that's really, really challenging. And we keep telling young adults, don't post that information, don't put it up there. But that's a difficult message when you're using these apps and you're using these sites which are specifically designed to get you to share more information because they want to mine it and sell it, but also because they want you to keep coming back. And the way they keep people coming back is by asking them to share more and more information so that people come back to see all the new stuff. So it's a challenging environment that young adults are developing themselves in from a technological perspective. And just finally, I know I'm out of time, I just want to be sure that we've kind of touched on all the health implications, since that's our sort of reason for being here today, and that the ways in which having mobile and social both changes your access to health information, your ability to get just-in-time health information, and also some of the challenges around sexual exploration and those implications that has for health. And I'm going to stop there, but thank you very much.